which you don't really. Thanks. Okay, and that is not of value for you, and you can't do anything. That's the knowledge part of it, right? And then it starts once you are connecting or you're looking deeply on the knowledge, you generate insight when you have something which is really uncovering something that you were not aware before. Let's say you see that you have people working at weekends, right? And you see one person working on weekends is probably an information which you maybe not necessarily interested, but you see a pattern in there, and you see more and more people actually working on a weekend on your project, and you're wondering what's happening there. And then you have another information which is then kind of, well, actually the knowledge that you see, well, and they have over hours, and it's not only that they work at a weekend, but they really have also a significant amount of over hours. So you generate an insight that there is obviously a higher demand on resource than you need. And now if you connect that insight with other information and you connect the dots and you combine that, maybe the quality of the output is not as in the quality you expected. And in that connection with you have over hours, on the other hand, your quality is not right. There seems to be a bit disbalance, right? And then it comes to the impact, right? You have then to make a conclusion out of that and think of, what does that mean? Do you need to deprioritize certain things? Do you need to revisit? Do you have to hire new people? Whatever is then the impact that you generate out of that. That's kind of that journey from, data, information, knowledge, insight, wisdom to impact. I have detailed it out here again on, so what does it actually mean, and how that funnel of information is then, or the funnel of data and the value generation of that data looks like. Also think if you think about data, don't think only about the data you generate, but also think external, right? So what are other sources? There are maybe macro trends from the industry. You see, you have data providers which you can leverage data, benchmark data. There is a lot out there. Also, and maybe from other internal systems which you are not leveraging directly, but others maybe in your company do, which could be also an important connector and data provider. Good. With that, I'm moving on to the next. So that's kind of the concept from data. Now with that, let's move on to data-driven decision-making in project management. So that's a framework based on also the data to insight to impact concept. We were thinking, how can we do better decisions? And if you think about decisions as, if you have fish in the sea, you have a lot of options. You can move to the left, to the right. You can turn 360 degrees, right? You have a lot of different opportunities, but the question is, in which direction do you go? In which speed do you go? And how do you move forward? And when you are a fish, you have your direction is led by your fin, right? So if your fin moves into a certain way, and that moves you in a certain direction. And on the other hand, also a fish has a brain, right? So it is also then, that's where it all lands and where you make then the final decision that is happening. And based on that, we have put together the fishbone framework around data-driven decision making. So let me walk you through that step by step. So the fin is the underlying question. So you are confronted with an issue or a problem or a decision that you have to take. You have to understand the question that you are trying to tackle. Sounds banal, but it is not that banal, because often we are trying to answer a question which is not the underlying issue. And let's take, as an example, let's take, let's take the example of, employees taking over hours, which you want to avoid. And, then the question is, your first question might be, how can I reduce, or can I reduce the work? Or, are they effective enough? Are there maybe, do you have to increase the workforce? And so you have to really understand what is the underlying issue behind it. Do they have too many other projects? Is it within the projects which you are tackling? I can tell you, for example, we are often confronted that we are not finding patients to, or it is we have to find the right patients in our clinical studies, for example. And then the initial question is, how can we increase, how can we accelerate patient enrollment in clinical studies? But that's not the right question, because the question could be, in very different dimension. It could be because the scientific background is too strict, that we have criteria that qualifies a patient to actually be eligible for a study. Or maybe we are not working with the right investigators because they are not seeing the patient population which we are targeting. And so that's why, just to give you some examples. So the question is really key and is moving your fish, which is your decision, into the respective direction. The next one is then the decision criteria. And that part is also crucial, because it is how will you take your decision. Often, and I've seen that a lot, that the decision is made once you are confronted, with the data, or with, the information, not necessarily the data, but you're confronted with information, and then you make a decision based on that. But you don't think upfront, what is my criteria, right? So is there a certain, let's say, for example, an NPV for my business case, and there is a minimum NPV that needs to be reached, and there is a certain timeline, and anything that is longer than X amount is not viable anymore. So that there are kind of clear criteria on which basis a decision will be made. It's not necessarily only one, it might be multidimensional, but it needs to be clear upfront. And it also needs to be clear, what is your acceptance criteria? So there might be boundaries where you say, well, this is just not that's not acceptable anymore. And in a company like I'm working, often those major decisions are not made on my level. Those decisions are made by really on a senior level. So those people, you have to approach them and make clear, what is your decision criteria, and also that there is a commitment on that level. Good. So that's the second thing. The third one is, and that's the major part, that's the longest part, is the data collection. So you have to identify so based on the criteria you have defined, what are the data that I have access to, I can access, what I would need, I don't have direct access, but I could get access to. But also, very importantly, be clear about what are your data gaps. You will never get all the data that you need. So when you present your outcome, you also want to be clear on what kind of data is actually missing in your analysis, and what were you not able to consider because it was not accessible. So, and then thirdly, this is and I know the data collection part is maybe, that's the most time-consuming part, but it's often not seen as the most sexiest part, right? But then there is the other one, the analytics, where a lot of things are at the moment happening. And here it's really about, how do you analyze it? How do you map it? Do you see a correlation, or and is it really also a causation? So it's not only analytics, you also have to, as a human, look at the outcome and understand, right? Yes, there is correlation, but is there really a causation? Is there, a connection, and is it really causing the implication that your data analytics shows you? And then last but not least is how you present that. So deliver a data story, provide the data, and make a conclusion. Ideally, you come with a recommendation and you come with alternative recommendations, right? So that's important. I have a lot of more details around each of those steps, which I don't want to bore you with, but because I have spoken to most of that, right? So that was the fin part. That's kind of the underlying question. I have spoken to that one. The second one is, the decision criteria important. There are some leading questions that you might want to, they are more supportive. We have developed that as a guidance for our teams. And here, that's really this is the biggest part, right? But that's also where my heart is close, is the data collection, the data quality. I mean, we all know that, right? Prep in, prep out. I mean, that's clear. But the thing is really the different steps you want to identify. Be clear what you need. Be clear where you can get it. Collect this, archive it, make it also transparent, and be also clear where are your data gaps. Then the data cleaning, which is kind of borderline. Data cleaning is where I feel like it's the data management part. We have mapped it here to the data analytics, but it's also understanding where in your data sets, where are maybe data, not only the data gaps I mentioned earlier, but in your data sets, there might be missing data. There is always missing data, right? Where are duplications, where are outliers, errors, and mapping. So there is also a lot of time spent with that. So the analysis itself is usually pretty straightforward, but it is really all the foundational part which takes the most of the time. And then, and last but not least, right, once you have an outcome and you have your coefficiencies, you have your R-square, make also sure you are clear about which ones are really, causations, and there your experience counts and your understanding of the data counts in that. And then how you build this data story, and that it's clear and understand. Good. So that's kind of the, that's the framework we have developed around the Fishbone framework for data-driven decision making. Now, of course, and why do we need data-driven decision making? You might say, well, you're super experienced, you know your business, you know how things work. Why would you need a data-driven decision? And one thing is you can uncover opportunities which you don't see without leveraging the data at hand, and also looking outside and taking data from competitiveness and also from benchmarks, etc. So it gives you, and if you really do the right data analytics, you can create a competitive advantage towards others. You can increase your profits, but you can also reduce costs, but increase your quality, ideally being even faster and identifying new opportunities. I mean, the biggest thing, what I see, and I have also experienced that where data-driven decision-making is helping, is to overcome psychological biases in the decision. So there are things like confirmation bias, asymmetric dominance, framing effects. There are a lot of different biases which are human and which all of us unconsciously have with us when we do decisions. For example, if you think about being super experienced, you have done that, these kind of projects again and again, you might repeat the same decisions, but it doesn't mean that it's the best decision, and you also don't know if it's maybe in this situation now the right way moving forward, because things are changing. It is constantly different. And I think even the more experienced you are, the more there is a tendency to be biased by your experience. That's what I would say. But you also can reduce your risk. You can be much faster in information processing. Once your data foundation is there, you can be much faster. I have seen decisions being delayed because there are maybe also a fear to make a decision, which is probably the worst thing to do. And it also trains your gut feeling. I mean, some things, and you also need to be clear on what decision do you want to be data-driven, and maybe where do you want to be faster, or you don't want to do all the different steps in order to make a decision, right? I think that's also a trade-off between when is it worth to make a data-driven decision. Okay, then let's move on, because that's also something which is close to my heart, is the different steps from data, looking a little bit different from the data as a foundation from analytics. I mean, I've spoken about that earlier, from that in the decision making, you have to have your data clear. You need to know what kind of data do you have. But on the other hand, you also need to be clear what is the investment you need to do on your data foundation versus your data analytics. And data organization, data governance, data acquisition is something that you do probably day in, day out, but it needs to be done thoroughly and it needs to be done continuously in order that you can leverage that. That means you need to have a consistent methodology in order that you can make comparison. I've seen, if I look here, a lot of you have timelines. So you need to make sure that you always capture the same data points of your timelines in order then to make a comparison from one project to the other. I mean, but it goes into, it can become very complex depending on the size of the project. So it all starts right with your data acquisition. So you store it on your own. You have maybe a portfolio project management system. You have maybe Excel tools. You have get that from other sources, right? So from social media, from ERPs, from your legacy data stores, external, or wherever you get that. Then you have to think how you connect the different sources. For example, we have different systems at controlling, at project management, from scientific databases, and these data all needs to be connected, right? So we have built a lot of pipelines between different data sources. There's the object data lakes, you can have data warehouses, very different ways how you actually engineer your data and you connect those data. And then you need to have a governance. You need to make sure who's actually data owner, who is a data steward for different data points or data and categories. The responsibility of data cleaning, it's an ongoing and it's a shared responsibility, but it needs to happen. And it's, as I said earlier, it's probably not the most fancy thing in our organization to look at your data quality. But once that part here, and it's also a little bit like an iceberg, right? Everything below the pinkish one is not seen by the organization. But if this part is not working, your analytics and your reporting will not fly. And but that's where you generate then the value. I mean, this is kind of the value generator is level 1 to 3. And the data science is, of course, maybe the more complex and the scientific part, depending on how you look at that, maybe also the more interesting one, but it is much faster when you have the other three, your foundation. Okay. Good. And then last part of my presentation, and then I'm really looking forward to exchange with you and hear what is your experience and maybe also to hear maybe some examples from how you use data in your projects. Just a recent use case where we were confronted, or my team was confronted with an issue around how we can better use data and to answer a question with data. Before I go there, actually, I have another Mentimeter, so not that it's only me speaking for an hour. So let's if you can pick up again your smartphone and screen the QR code, or you're still in there. There is another question which I would want to ask you, and that is, for what purpose are you already currently leveraging analytics and project management? So I assume you do. Let's say you do, and then let me. To the Mentimeter. Just have to start the next one. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So for what purpose are you leveraging data analytics in project management today? So you can slide the bars, and then you can say, well, you don't do it at all. I have put here 8 different categories. If you feel like there is something which you're missing, please feel free to put that in the chat message, right? So, so I said I offer you here for risk assessments, for budget projection, for timeline projection, for to forecast resource demands, to understand better your quality measures, also to forecast quality, your results of your project, your probability of success, and KPIs. Timeline and resources as well as KPIs are high on the score. Budget projections, okay. Okay, I have 10. Thank you. I was on mute, right? It looked like risk assessment is lowest on the on where you use it, but budget is certainly high, resources high, but also for key performance indicators, which can be of very different scope. Right? I understand that. You're using that. Super. Thanks for sharing. And with that, I'm switching back to the presentation. And I'm going to this one. Oops. Here we go. So, I mean, and that's the whole thing of predictive analytics, right? What if we use the data from past projects in order there? They want to stop soon. Can you still see my screen, Sophie?
Yeah, the what if.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yes, it's perfect. All right, so you're not sharing anything now.
I was kicked out, that's funny. Okay, let me reshare.
Now it works again.
Perfect, thanks so much. Good, so this is kind of the idea of predictive analytics, right? So that your past projects are telling you how future progress goes for your projects, and in our case, particularly what kind of demand is needed for a new project, and that was the idea behind it. And now, you know, the specific problem statement was that we were not able to estimate the duration and costs for our drug development programs. We can do that, of course, very thoroughly. We have algorithms, we have bottom-up assessments, etc. But with very limited information, that was kind of the key criteria. We don't have much information, but we still need a quick decision in order to understand what would it take us, particularly for business development opportunities, and during due diligence, is it a viable NPV? Is it something that is of interest for us? And there we have to have that information very quickly, and we don't know a lot of parameters at that stage. So we were looking into how we can build a tool to be able to predict the cost and the duration from historic pattern, We have built a predictive model with very limited coefficients and used a multiple linear regression model, and with a fit for purpose accuracy, meaning it's not super precise, right? But it is still in a decent accuracy that we can make a decision, and that it gives us immediate information. So that's what we did. I worked with a data scientist. So don't ask me on the details of the model, please. Don't do that. I'm lost there. But I can show you the different steps and how we have done that. So what we have taken, so we have actually taken only internal data. We were looking into also going external because we are not a small company, but on the other hand, we are not like the biggest pharma company in the world, right? So we have limited data, but when we go outside, the difficulty was, and maybe that would be the next step, but it's also the question of what's the granularity of data you can get from the outside versus what the granularity of details you have in. So we took then basically all the actual costs we have and actual durations for projects since 2014. We have that all in a very structured, standardized methodology captured in a portfolio project management system, and with really high data quality in principle, but still we had to clean the data. We had to make decisions what we do with missing data. We had to develop rules in order to also to map certain data. So we spent a lot of time doing that. And then, and that was kind of, when you look back at the data foundation, that was really the major part. And then there was my Indian colleague did the analytics, and he had then built that multiple linear regression model. And we were looking at the different coefficients. So here we also looked then on which variables are actually really, which ones are correlating, but which ones have really a causality to that. Because some of the data we saw, there is a correlation, but then when I look at that from a content perspective, it didn't make sense because we actually already had certain variables covering that. So you also have to be careful that you're not overfitting your model and you have different variables in there which are actually measuring the same thing. To give you an example, I give you an example now from that project. I hope it helps you. But again, if I go to a clinical study, right? So we do those studies globally in all different countries, and we work with different investigators. So you can count, or you can't say, well, the more investigators, the faster I am, because I have more physicians who are actually screening for patients. So they are, we can be faster finding the right patient. On the other hand, you can also look at the countries or how many regions do you have and how many countries do you have involved. However, the more countries I have, the more investigators or physicians I'm working with. So it doesn't make sense to have both the country and the number of physicians included. You have to decide for one of those, right? Because otherwise you're measuring basically the same thing. That's what I mean with, overfitting your model. Okay, and this is then, to give you further details how that looked like. So we took the data from our, it's Planisware is the software, our portfolio management system, and we did all the data processing in Palantir. The nice thing is with Palantir, and I have to admit it was the first time I used Palantir, is you can set up rules how the data should be actually processed. That means the next time you upload the data, you have already defined the rules, and is then basically already funneling down or mapping the data based on the rules that you have defined in Palantir. Okay, so the data processing we did in Palantir. We had then, the colleague has built the multiple linear regression model, and based on the costs, so it was the 2 parameters, right? We want to understand how much will it cost and how long will it take us. We have identified for the cost model 5 coefficients, and for the duration model 6. And we have kept the variables that can be changed really to a minimum, because otherwise the accuracy of the model would have been not flying. And the good thing, as I said earlier, right, we had it can be updated anytime with new actual data, and then the model will learn based on the new data, and that's also then increasing our confidence intervals over time. Just to give you a flavor, right? So this is, I mean, it doesn't tell you too much, right? But here, we have a minimal viable product at that stage, right? But we have the data processing was in Palantir. We have said, well, the user interface is in Excel. So all the data is then transferred, or there is a data pipe from Palantir to an Excel file, and there are underlying data then in Excel. But what the user sees is basically this colorful thing. And there are only 5 different or 6 variables that can be changed by the person, and then they can find, out how much time does it take us. We have said, well, let's do a box plot to visualize that, the timelines and the cost, which is then immediately showing you also how accurate is your assessment. And we have added here some information that we said, well, we are projecting it will cost you when you start today 68 million euros. If you start, we have also built in an inflation rate based on historic inflation. Probably not the best thing at the moment, right? So we were already discussing maybe we should not model the inflation, but we do a rate there anyway. Good, but that's details. And then we have also comparison to benchmarks, right? So you see, we haven't had too many, in this example here, not too many sample sizes, right? They were based on those variables, only 7, but the model is taking all the different projects. We said we have 31 projects, takes all the projects, and based on the coefficients, then builds the cost and the duration. And the duration, we said, well, we forecast a duration of 1,010 days, and the benchmark is lower, but there are also reasons behind that. Yeah. Good. So that's kind of, in summary, how that looked like. It's a really nice tool for that purpose. So it successfully answers that question in the beginning, but also you have then to understand, and we have to build that out, because at the moment we have, with 31 projects, not plenty of data. So it's also a matter of constantly growing our data set. But the good thing, the model is built, and it is every time we close a new project, we are actually putting new data in there and are able to better understand what's happening. And yeah, maybe one thing I want to highlight, maybe one downside is, and I had a discussion yesterday because I was presenting that to a leadership committee, where they said, well, yeah, that's all good. The thing is, we want to be faster and we want to be cheaper in the future. So they are saying, well, yes, that's how we have used to be, but the question is, how will we be in the future? Because we want to be, faster and more cost efficient, which is an interesting part into the discussion, right? So, but yeah, just as a fun fact. Good. So in summary, let me summarize, so the objective decisions, the data-driven decision-making helps you to avoid the pitfalls of the biases we have in decision-making. Really important. You have to understand the underlying questions. That's really the key. That is guiding you through your decision-making. And and understand initially what is the basis on which the decision will be taken, right? So that's also important, which then can build your data story and your data acquisition. Understand the value of your data. So think about really, what do you generate? Yes, there is active input, but every day you also generate other data, right? And so the question, which of them are really of value? Which one can you actually leverage? And invest in your data foundation. And I spoke a lot about the data foundation, right? So be clear on, investing in data quality, having clear structures, have standards, how you capture your data, have consistent project methodology behind the tracking, and that clearly maximize the value you can generate with that in a long term. It's nothing that's happening, in one day. It's an investment that is paying out over time, and you need to have a long breath actually to with that. And with that, I'm closing and I'm handing over back to Tufik and see if we have any questions on that. And hopefully you feel like your initial questions have been answered.
Thank you, Miriam. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your question into the question box in your control panel. Actually, from my opinion, what you mentioned and what you discussed in this session was really, I don't know how to specify that, but really it was something perfect. You explained everything in a very good way. And actually, this topic is of interest to me, honestly.
Okay.
Data, yes, and I'm completing the Google Data Analyst on Coursera.
Figure, do you want to have questions in the chat?
Yes, you can start. If you have any question, please type it in the chat box. I can't see any questions yet. How can we have the segmentation and demographics streamlined? Miriam?
So, trying to understand the question, honestly. So how can we have the segmentation and demographics streamlined? You mean from...
We can take it from marketing perspective if you want. Am I right?
Maybe you can unmute and explain the question. That would be helpful.
Our guest is
present.
Can you unmute, please? We have another question. Value of effectiveness.
Okay. So maybe I can take Gottfried's question while we are trying to understand Hassan's question. So Gottfried, so how came to the decision to go for data-driven decision-making approach and the use of the fishbone method? So first of all, the issue at hand in our organization is that we want to be faster and need to be faster with decision making. I'm sure that's also in other organizations an issue, and so that's where we said, well, we have to be more data driven in our decision making, and we need to rethink how we do that currently and have a consistent approach. It's not like we are not data driven at the moment, but it's kind of really being consistent with that. Yeah, but the question is, what's the threshold? It's a very good question, right? So it's a trade-off between what is the impact of the decision, right? So how large is it? If you go for, a low impact decision, you don't want to go through all the efforts. On the other hand, if you have the data at hand and even the effort is maybe, or the impact is not as large, like a business development opportunity, and you are in licensing for several million and a compound, or you do a deal which has really high costs, you might still want to do a data-driven decision because the data is at hand and you can go through that. So it's a trade-off between the impact, but on also how good is your data foundation and how easily can you get access to that. I hope that answers your question. Now back to value effectiveness. So I'm not sure if you come from the scientific background, maybe that's part of your question. So I'm still not completely clear.
Yeah. So thank you for taking the question, Maria. So when we do the analysis and bring analytics into perspective, I think you pretty much answered when you answered the presentation of data analytics, like the segmentation and demographics, when you had the data in terms of the overall value. So how much addition can we contribute towards in terms of the input that we have in the particular project, and what the value addition that we can add to by adding those data perspectives into effectiveness, right? So it's the impact can be analyzed. If the benefits are more in terms of the investment, then you have the ROI in place. That's what the whole agenda was. And think you pretty much answered it in the last question, and thank you for taking it up.
Okay, thank you, Nasrin. I'm glad I answered it. Thanks. Yeah, then I see another one. How much data is enough for what purpose? It's interesting you ask. I mean, it's a really good one, and I don't think I have the answer, right? I can just anecdotally, I did as part of my MBA, I did also a data analytics course, and I think and wanted to do, you know, with a data set and an analysis. And here, I mean, what the professor said to me, you need at least 30, 40 observations in order to do statistics, right? So something like that. I don't know if that's a rule of thumb. It's probably more kind of, you know, I don't know if the more is better there as well, because you also need to be careful of the quality you input, right? And you will always have outliers, but you know, it's also interesting if you speak with people. A lot of, I mean, recently not so much, but a few years ago there was this big data and buzzword, and but really, you know, if you speak about big data, it's really, I haven't seen big data in my working environment, honestly. So because then you speak about hundreds and thousands of data.
Yes, so, exactly.
And that's, maybe you can add to that.
Yes, to add on that, when you're talking about big data and how far you need to go back in these data, what or history data will be needed for forecasting and for this stuff. When we're talking about decision making, maybe you will need to take a decision based on a period, which is a specific period. You don't need to go back that much in time or in history. Am I right, Miriam?
Yeah, it also needs to be representative data, because you saw for that example with the cost analysis, we went back until 2014. We could have gone further, but then, you know, we said, well, then it's not representative to our, you know, our current projects, because the methodology has changed. Our projects are not comparable, how it has been done 10 years ago. So that's where we set like kind of the threshold. So, you know, it's a gray answer. I know. I'm sorry. I would love to tell you, you know, you need to have this amount of data points, but it's again, it's a trade-off. You have to understand the more, yes, the better, but the quality needs to be there as well, right? And it needs to be representative of what you are doing today and what you will do in the future. And yeah, I think that's good. I think where did we stop? Thanks for bringing so many questions up.
There's another question. Do you only use the model for R&D projects or also for other project types?
So this we used only for R&D projects, right? Because you also need to be careful. I mean, you can't do, yeah. So you need to have, yeah. So we did that only in R&D projects, right? You can do that, of course.
That depends on the data that you have.
Exactly, you can do that for other projects as well, right? Why wouldn't you? But then you have, again, you need to have projects which are similar to the projects you're doing, right? If you're in a construction or you're in an IT environment, you need projects which are, you know, similar to what you anticipate to do. So you need that representative data set, right? And then also those projects which are similar to what you intend to do.
We use data, it should be valid, it should be relevant, it should be clean. So these are some important factors that should be taken into consideration when using data for decision making. It is relevant if you might not get a decision for a project or a complete new product, which is out of the box.
You might not get a decision for a project. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, and we also had that discussion because we are, and let's go, I'm speaking about, you know, the area I'm working in, but you can translate that also to other things. But we have certain indications which we are expert in. We do a lot of multiple sclerosis, we do a lot of oncology. Now, the tendency in the industry general, but, you know, is maybe you go into more niche indication, rare diseases. And then again, it's the question, how representative is your past performance for those? So yes, we are using it still also for other indications. So it's not necessarily, you know, the same indication and not necessarily the, but you have to be conscious about what are the differences of that new project to the ones that you have done in the past, and then see how you can build that in, right? I hope, Stephanie, that makes sense. But if it, you know, if it's not comparable at all, then I would really refrain from, you know, you don't have experience with that, right? Then you can't use your past performance to tell about the future performance. I think we skipped a few questions. Thinking yes, and this one, no, how many years? Yeah. There was from Andreas, there was a question, how many years of project management data was required to generate the data models? Yeah, so we used eight years of data, right? So there were then 30, I mean, we had many more projects, but we had, again, not for all projects, we had costs, for example, because we do a lot of collaboration with other companies, and then we have cost sharing, and then the costs are not showing the real cost. So that's also kind of then a selection, right? Which projects do you include? Which one do you take out? That's reducing your sample size. So Saravan has a question, are going down the rabbit hole when there are several perspectives with data collection? Gut feel trumps. So, you know, my advice would be keep it as simple as possible and as high level as possible in the beginning. Because if you go more and more into the details and the rabbit hole you are mentioning, right, you get lost in the details, and you don't get an answer, and also you are segmenting more and more your data, and you lose the overall picture. So I would recommend to be as high level and maybe also superficial in the beginning with your analysis. you can go more into depth later, right? So, but start really high level first, right? Think about, let's say, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but instead of taking different phases in your project, right? Take what will the overall length of my project be from start to end without any segmentation, and then look at all the different other projects you had earlier, right? So how long did it take us, and what were maybe drivers which are impacting that duration, and then you can think about, what are maybe then subsets of that duration. Then you can say, well, closing a project or high peak. I don't know what kind of project you're doing, right? But it kind of so there might be different parts of it that you then want to deep dive and look at, and then you can segment that duration. But let's start really high level first. That would be my recommendation. Good. Do we have another question, Tufik? You're on mute at the moment.
Sorry, I guess we covered all of the questions, but I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
No, it was a real pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me, and yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
I would like to take advantage and ask all our participants to network, get to know each other. On the other hand, I would advise them to volunteer for the PMI Germany chapter. We have also lots of events coming later. I will ask my friend Thomas to tell us something about volunteering. Thomas, are you still here?
Yes, I'm still here. Hi, Tufik.
Hi.
So, did you all know that Tufik is a volunteer for a year or so, and actually he is sitting in Beirut, Lebanon. So, and we have two other volunteers. So Xu Ying, who is Chinese, she's sitting in Frankfurt, but now she has something to work. And we have very new Ravinda, who is from India, but also all living now in Darmstadt. So our team of four, me including, is very international and global, and that's why we do our presentations in English language, and it's very enriching to work in such a team and have the different views and different capabilities. And I think that's what volunteering is about, not doing some work alone, but also do it in a team and learn about other culture, other people. So the PMI chapter in Germany is having a lot of open volunteer positions. You might want to look at our website and see what volunteers we have. Or you can also look in the PMI volunteer system, where we also publish officially, globally, all our volunteer positions in English language. So if you want to meet nice people, if you want to have a sandbox, if you want to do something outside your work, where you can't destroy anything too easily, you try something out, you meet people and you enhance your network, then volunteering is something for you. You can start very small, maybe 2 or 3 hours a month, and then I guarantee you, if you are good and if you can contribute, it will soon be much more than 3 hours per month. And you have to be somebody who can handle his workload very well. So this also teaches us how to do several things. So this is what we do. And, the end stadium of volunteer at PMI is to be a PMI fellow. And maybe that's something you could look for in the future, maybe in 10, 15 years. To do that. But it always starts with a volunteer position at the chapter. Come to us, and we are looking.
Yeah, so this is Prasoon from Berlin.
Yeah.
And I work for SAP. I would definitely like to, is there a chapter for Berlin also, or do we only have it in Darmstadt?
No, we have one German chapter. No, that's only one chapter. And if you volunteer for this chapter. So it's a
Yeah,
legal
okay.
entity, yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
it happens to have a headquarters in Berlin, but we have local groups like the Darmstadt local group, also in Berlin and in other cities, about 30 local groups. And most volunteering, actually, you know, Tufik is in Lebanon. Most volunteering today is anyhow virtually, you know.
You can be anywhere and volunteer and work with the group that you like or you feel it.
So is there a get together happening within Germany very soon, or?
Yes, from time to time there is a volunteer face-to-face get together, but the normal work in the groups is done mostly virtually.
Virtual, yeah. This is the new trend around after the pandemic. That's the new topic of being virtual everywhere. Yeah, so definitely I would like to
Caroline
contribute.
just shares that there is a local group in Berlin. Yes, sure.
Yes.
And in Frankfurt and in others, in Munich and Hamburg and wherever you are. The point with the Darmstadt local group is just that we are a group that is globally diverse, and we have chosen that English is our standard language. So that's why we can open up virtual events in English language, and many other local groups do that in German language, so they don't attract too many people from outside Germany.
Ja, ich verstehe Deutsch gut, kein Problem für mich.
Gut.
Ja, Thomas, für welche Funktion sucht ihr da noch?
Das ist eine gute Frage, die habe ich nicht im Kopf, weil die Liste der Funktionen ist ungefähr 6, 7 Seiten lang mit jeweils 10 Positionen pro Seite. Also man muss, es gibt in allen Faktoren, ob du jetzt Marketing machst, Social Marketing, ob du am Newsletter mitarbeitest, ob du Events vorbereitest. So wir in Darmstadt, wir sind 4 Volunteers, wir machen nur Events, ja, wir machen kein sonstiges Schreiben von irgendwelchen Dingen. Und was ich sehr spannend finde, wer sowas möchte, ist, wir haben eine nicht Local Gruppe, sondern eine Community, die leitet Projektleiter aus an andere NGOs. Die haben zum Beispiel mitgestaltet, dass wir in München dort ein Projekt unterstützen, was die Frauenhäuser mit einer neuen Software ausgestattet hat. Das fand ich sehr spannend, sehr wertvoll und auch sehr viel zurückgebend an die Gesellschaft. Ja, und ich denke, das sind auch Volontierpositionen. Man muss nicht nur fürs Chapter oder für PMI volontieren und da etwas erreichen. Man kann auch woanders dann sozusagen soziale Projekte machen mit der Unterstützung von PMI. Und die Frage von Aaron, do we need to become a member to volunteer? Yes, PMI Germany has a policy that only members of PMI Germany can be volunteers for PMI Germany. If you go to PMI Global, there are certain volunteer positions where you don't need to be a volunteer, but not in Germany.
Is there a local group in Berlin? Yes, there is a local group in Berlin.
Kannst du haben? Can I have any contact, particularly for Berlin?
I think if you go to the website of PMI Germany Chapter, you can find lots of information there.
Yeah, I did try to find out that and try to register, and that's when you replied back yesterday, because I think there's some problem with my ID. It says I'm locked and I'm not able to.
You should be a member to the PMI globally. And
yes, I am already. Yeah.
All right.
So I got my PMP ACP last year.
Yes.
And then I registered for both since last year, but unfortunately I haven't found any luck.
So it's Prajun talking, yeah?
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
Prasoon, yeah.
I will come back to you after that meeting with the contact for Berlin and also try to help you with your locked status.
And we even have some groups on LinkedIn. You can follow these groups if you would like to.
Yeah, okay.
Now, with that, we covered everything. I will now move to the final step where we usually claim our PDU code for our visitors. Thank you again for joining us today, and hope we will see you next time. Thank you, Miriam. You really was wonderful. You gave us a very good presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.
Bye-bye.
Tufik, would you mind to stay a little bit online? I would like to ask you something.
Sure.
I'm actually living and working close to Darmstadt. I'm in Hemsbach. I'm